All right, let's dive right into this. Look, street photography is absolutely not about setting up perfectly staged studio lights or, patiently waiting for a subject to hit their exact mark. It's raw, it's a deeply unpredictable genre. We're talking about an art form literally defined by repetition, sudden friction, and the constant, relentless challenge of capturing entirely unexpected moments out in the wild. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the absolute core tactics and mindsets that separate the amateurs from the seasoned observers, and we're drawing these directly from the hard-earned lessons of the street. To really understand the stakes out there on the street, we first have to look at a pretty wild statistical reality. 90%. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a massive, defining number for anyone who grabs a camera and walks out their front door. So, what does that 90% actually mean? Well, it means this. The vast majority of the photos you take are going to be of a completely unexpected moment. The street is never, ever going to wait for you to get ready. The street doesn't care if your lens cap is still on or if you're distracted checking your phone. Because the absolute best shots happen in literally a fraction of a second, physical readiness isn't just a fun tip, it's your baseline for survival in this genre.
Which brings us to Section 1, Physical Readiness. Always be ready.
Think about how most people carry a camera versus how a truly prepared street photographer does it. That traditional neck or side carry, yeah, it might be comfortable, sure, but it adds absolutely crucial milliseconds to raising your camera. Plus, it draws so much unnecessary attention when you suddenly swing this heavy thing up to your eye, and ultimately, it just leads to missed photos. By contrast, if you use a wrist wrap and carry the camera right up at chest or face level, you completely eliminate that physical delay. It's a real game changer. You're in this sneaky, instantly ready position to capture a fleeting moment before it vanishes into thin air. Now, let's be totally realistic here. You can't literally hold a heavy camera to your face for 4 hours straight. I mean, unless you don't want any blood left in your forearms. So the trick is to rely on what we can kind of call your spidey senses. You really have to trust the feel of your environment. When the energy of the street suddenly shifts and you anticipate a looming photo, that is exactly when you bring the camera up to that high-ready position. You save your forearms during the lulls, and when the moment strikes, all you have to do is aim, compose, and shoot. And you do it all without telegraphing your movements to the entire block. All right, moving on to Section 2, Navigating the Chaos. Master your environment. Street photography naturally pulls us toward people, right? Which means we often find ourselves in the middle of massive crowds, crazy protests, or super busy street fairs. But you can definitely have too much of a good thing. The very first step when you're in a massive crowd is simply recognizing sensory overload. When there's just too much happening, your brain gets scrambled and you lose your observational eye. When that happens, you need to execute a tactical retreat. Move to the outskirts of the crowd. You don't have to leave entirely, just take a step back. From there, start photographing the people leaving the chaos. It's wild, but the magic often happens right on the edges, where the crowd sort of falls apart and individual subjects suddenly stand out clearly. Doing this refuels your creative eye, allowing you to eventually jump back into the fire, or honestly, you might just realize the best shots were out on the outside all along. And speaking of mastering your environment, how you navigate it socially matters immensely. We all love shooting with friends, and it might be great for networking, but honestly, your mind ends up split in two completely different places. You're trying to observe the chaotic street, but you're also kind of worrying about your friend's time and if they're bored. Conversely, shooting alone gives you the undeniable advantage of total, complete focus. You are 100% zoned in on observing. If you find incredible light hitting one particular corner, you have the total freedom to just stand there and wait 15 minutes for the exact right subject to walk by, and you don't have to ask anyone for permission. To truly observe, you need your undivided attention. Okay. Next up, Section 3, Technical Liberation. Simplify your settings. We absolutely have to talk about this deeply ingrained myth that real photographers only ever shoot in full manual mode. Look, modern camera processing power is incredible, and you should absolutely be using it to your advantage. Utilizing auto or program mode, often called P mode, actively lightens your mental workload. Instead of constantly staring down at your dials, your attention is strictly focused on your surroundings. It stops you from fiddling with exposure settings while the perfect, once-in-a-lifetime moment just passes you by. You want to free up your mental RAM so you can focus entirely on finding beautiful compositions and let the camera capture great exposures quickly. Seriously, let the machine do the math while you do the art. That brings us to Section 4, Social Defense. Prepare for questions. Sooner or later, someone is going to stop you and ask what you're doing. It happens to everyone, and it can be incredibly anxiety-inducing. But there's a powerful tool to handle this exact situation: digital portfolio validation. Instead of clumsily scrolling through the back of your camera for a stranger or pulling up a messy social media feed, you create a dedicated, unlinked webpage. Make it a clean, beautifully curated gallery of your absolute best work. Maybe even throw a QR code on there and have it all bookmarked right on your phone. When you're confronted, you just pull this up. It instantly and elegantly validates your presence. It proves to any defensive stranger that you're a legitimate artist, and it almost always entirely diffuses the tension. Finally, we have Section 5, the mindset of failure. Embrace the failures. Did I literally just waste an entire afternoon without taking a single good photo? Man, it is such a crushing internal doubt that creeps in when you're just sitting there on the train ride home. You've been walking for hours, your feet are aching, you check your camera, and you realize you have absolutely nothing to show for it. You start wondering if your photos are terrible or if you're ever going to go out and do this again. It is a deeply isolating feeling. But actually, scratch that whole mindset. Let's completely reframe that narrative. Because this right here, this is the secret to longevity in this craft. Missed shots, turned off cameras, and forced intentions definitely feel like wasted time and failure. But in reality, they are vital moments of practice and growth. You didn't waste an afternoon. You were practicing your observation. You were putting in the reps. You learned a hard lesson about keeping your camera ready. The fact that you're frustrated doesn't mean you're a bad photographer. It means you actually care about your work. You cannot get better without practicing, and a day with 0 good photos is simply a vital practice session. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly important thought to wrap up this explainer. What did your failures teach you today? Look, street photography is chaotic, it is insanely difficult, and it is paved with constant rejection and missed moments. But if you embrace that grit, if you prepare your physical gear, simplify your technical process, and just completely change how you view a tough afternoon, the street literally becomes an endless classroom. So analyze those failures, let them fuel your next outing, and get back out there.